Good evening, everyone. So it's 6:05, so we can start. Uh, can everyone please mute themselves? Okay, so it's 6:05, so we can start. Anybody who joins in later, I can admit them. So just let me know once if my screen is visible and if I'm clearly audible.
Yes.
Okay, okay. Thank you. Do let me know if at any point my screen stops showing or if my voice starts cracking or if I become inaudible. Okay. So,
Sure.
good evening, everyone. My name is Aishi. I am a PMRF research scholar from the Department of Chemistry, IIT Bombay. And I am a TA, PMRF TA for this course, Introduction to Professional Scientific Communication. And today we'll be discussing some of the practice problems. Hopefully, this session will help you solve the current assignments that have been uploaded on the NPTEL website. So we'll move on to the first question. Okay, so before, I don't know how many of you attended the last session that happened last Monday, but we discussed this question last session, and the answer, we were a little bit confused about the answer, but today we can talk about this question a little bit more based on the lecture videos that you might have already seen on the website. Yes. So anybody who would like to take this question in the statement, Ram has a house. In his house, there are 4 bedrooms and a large garden outside. In the garden, Ram has planted many fruit trees. Most of them are apples. The text given in red and the green color fonts represent respectively the following. Anybody would like to take a guess?
Given a new concept.
Yes. And why not fact and observation? So last time we were thinking about fact and observation. It's obviously fact and an observation. Ram has a house, and in his house, it's obviously a fact. And the green part is that it's an observation. Someone has seen that Ram has planted many fruit trees. So obviously, it's also fact and observation. But if we are solving this question in the context of the lecture videos that have been uploaded, then yes, given a new concept. So before that, we'll discuss a little bit about the given a new concept that this question is related to. So okay, this slide is very not visible. So this has been taken from one of the lecture slides that Professor Ganesh has uploaded on the NPTEL website. So the text A reads, I'll read it out because it's probably not that visible. Text A reads, the application of science to the creation of useful devices to meet the needs of society is called mechanical engineering. This is the first sentence. The second sentence is, the design, manufacture, operation and maintenance of a wide variety of machinery are the focus of a mechanical engineer's work. And the third sentence is, jet engines and minute instruments for use in medicine are amongst the products designed by mechanical engineers. So I read the first 2 sentences of text A, and I'll read the first 3 sentences of text B also. Text B says that mechanical engineering is the application of science to the creation of useful devices to meet the needs of society. Mechanical engineers focus on the design, manufacture, operation and maintenance of a wide variety of machinery. The products of their work range from jet engines to minute instruments for use in medicine. So can anybody, if you heard both the texts properly, can anybody tell me which text is more relevant, which text is easier to understand, which text you will want to read further out of these two? Anybody? I know it's not clearly visible. I thought it will be clearly visible, but the text is not.
The text two, I think.
Text B, yes. Correct, correct. And the reason? Any reason?
Um, it sounds to be the information which is given. It sounds to be more sorted as compared to.
Yes, correct. So the information, actually the information given in both the text is similar, but the information given in text B is linked. Like the second sentence has some link to the first sentence. So the first
Is
sentence
it
talks.
continuity?
Yes, correct.
Continuity.
Continuity is the right word. So the first sentence talks about mechanical engineering, and the second sentence starts with the words mechanical engineers. So someone who's reading it will know that this the second sentence is linked to the first sentence. However, the information in both the texts are the same. The in text A also, the second sentence talks about the exact same thing, but it starts basically it's in passive voice. It starts with what mechanical engineers do, and then it moves to the mechanical engineering part. So even though both the texts actually give out the same level of information, text B is easier to read because they have already, in the first sentence, they have already provided a concept. They have already provided some information, which is the given concept, and in the second, when they're starting the second sentence, they're starting with a given concept, like they're starting with the words mechanical engineers, which have already been described in the first sentence, and then they're moving on to the new concept, that is what mechanical engineers basically do. So that is why text B is more relevant. Text B is scientifically, or anyway, I think text B is more relevant and easier to read. Someone who's going through someone who's reading will prefer to read text B than text A. Sorry, I have to admit everyone. So yeah, someone will prefer reading text B more than text A. So that is what has been described. This is from the slides only. So what makes a text easy to read? Text A is less effective because it is difficult to see what the paragraph is all about, because each sentence starts with a new concept even though the information is same. New information which at first sight does not appear to be related to what has come before. It's basically in passive voice. This is why you may find this version more difficult to understand. And it has text A basically is not that relevant, but text B is more effective because each sentence, the first one introduces a concept about mechanical engineering, and each sentence after that begins with something that has already been mentioned, like mechanical engineers, or is otherwise familiar to the reader. In this text, the new information is placed at the end of the sentence. It's basically an active voice. So this given before new ordering makes it easier for readers to see how each new piece of information fits into what they already know. Thus, given information provides a context that helps us make sense of what is new. So that is why, so you can see how the framework, how you frame a sentence, how you frame information can make an hell heaven difference. So even when you are reading research papers, since this course is mainly about scientific communication, when you are reading science research papers, I think I talked about this last session also, people mostly read the abstract part first. If the abstract part doesn't seem appealing, people will actually stop reading it. So people go through the abstract part first, and so the abstract part needs to be, I think the most important part of the paper is the abstract. It needs to be very clear, concise, brief, but at the same time appealing. You should give a little bit of introduction. You should say what motivated the study, and then you should end with what are your major findings. Like not very clearly, but in a very concise manner. And that too, the framework should be really appealing. Like you cannot write like text A over here. You should like text B. So even someone who's not that much into the field should be able to understand what this paper is all about. Even if they don't understand the technicalities of it, they should understand that this paper is is to be talking about this. So that is, so you can see how text, even though giving out the same information, the framework makes a really big difference. So yes, the answer to this question will be given a new concept. Obviously, we in the last session we thought it will be fact and observation, which is also true, but given in the context of this lecture, of this course, it will be given a new concept. Okay. So we'll move on to the next question. It is essential that we evaluate the quality of internet resources because information obtained via the internet ranges from very poor to very good. Anybody? This is very basic. Or because we live in a generation where internet can give answers to everything. But still, what do you think the answer is? Anybody? I'm audible, right? Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes,
you're
yes.
audible.
Anybody? Just read the question once, and if you'd like to
It
try.
is essential that we
Sorry, I
True.
can't. True. Check. 1 second. I
It's
think.
true.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, correct. I
True.
think anybody is joining. No. Okay. Yeah, it's true. So even
You
though
give
we.
the access to somebody else, Ashi. You will
Yeah,
not
yeah.
reach them.
1 second. Yeah, I think I should. Are you online from your
No, I
laptop?
am on phone. Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
no, no, I
Anybody
am
who's
on.
online by laptop and will be willing to take.
Mayur, you can maybe.
Okay, anybody who's willing to, like, I'll make you co-host, and you need to admit. So anybody who's online via laptop can help me out. I don't know. Anybody is not.
Just a minute. I'll connect from the laptop. You
Okay,
continue.
okay. Yeah, yeah, sure. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yes. So obviously this is also true. Because even though if you live in a world, in an era where internet can give you the answers of everything, still you need to be very cautious about what you believe on the internet, because wait 1 second, I'll just because we live because it's while it's easier to read stuff from the internet, it's very easy to write stuff on the internet too. So not everyone who's giving you information on the internet is very authentic. So obviously this is also true. With respect to scientific communication, I would always say that please like trust only scientific books or scientific research journals. I think even Wikipedia will not be able to give you 100% authentic information all the time. So it's most authentic information will come from scientific books and research papers, because both are peer reviewed. So someone has reviewed those articles and then published them online. So with respect to scientific communication, definitely rely on these two entities. Otherwise also, apart from scientific communication also, you should always verify the authenticity of any information that you find on the internet, because the internet is a really dark place. So while how will you evaluate the internet resources? First, if you're reading something on the websites, the quality of information varies tremendously, and anyone can publish and post a website on the internet. So nowadays literally anyone can do publish, like you don't even require coding and stuff. You can literally go to Wix or Google sites, and you can basically without any knowledge of coding, you can actually publish and post anything on the internet. And if there's a if the SEO factor also works out, if someone is searching for something that you have explicitly written on your website might also come up in the search when in the search engines. So literally anyone can publish and post a website. So obviously that makes like that should tell you how the authenticity of anything you find on internet is. And whereas most websites don't employ editors or fact checkers, you can make a website of your own. Nobody's going to, and you're not employing any editor or fact checker. Whatever you're writing, if people come across that, people might believe it. So that's why evaluating internet resources is very important. And obviously you need reliable resources for your class assignments and everything. So to evaluate, how do you evaluate which thing is you can trust and which not? First, authority. Obviously, who are the authors and what are their credentials? It should be listed on the page. If you are basically searching for scientific information, apart from research journals and apart from scientific books also, there are some websites, some articles that you can find online. But then also you should check who are the authors, and are like, is that mentioned, who are the authors and what are their credentials? Do they work at any institute? Are they from any industry? You should always check that, if that is listed on the page. And obviously if that information is coming from another source, you should check the reference. Some articles take information from various research journals and they publish in a very concise manner, which is fine, but then you should go back to the references and also check if whatever has been published on the article is true or not. So do not rely blindly on those articles. And even if that information is coming from a source, what is that source? Is it an organization? Is it an association, a company, an institute? Then is the person, like, you can see the credentials of the author. If you can see the credentials of the author, do you think according to your knowledge, do you think that the person is qualified enough to give that information on the topic? See, for example, if you're searching something on let's say CRISPR-Cas9, it's a very hot topic because it won a Nobel in 2020, I think. So whatever, if you're searching for something like that, apart from research journals, if you're looking at an article, you go back and see the information of that person, and then you see the credentials. That person might be an undergrad or a postgrad or whatever the level of information is. Do you think that person is qualified enough to give that information? If that person has not taken information from scientific journals and he or she has not mentioned it explicitly, if you think that person has actually talked about their own opinion, do you think this person is qualified enough to give that information? Next will be, has the site been reviewed, recommended, or did it receive any award? By whom? So most research journals are peer reviewed. Like, you submit a research journal and even a review journal, but I'm talking about research journal now. You have conducted some experiments, you have seen the reproducibility of the experiments, like you have conducted the experiments at least number of times. You have seen that the replicates are showing also like similar results. There is no significant difference between the results, and then you have given out the paper for publication, and obviously that goes through a peer review process. Now every journal has their own different specific peer review process, like reviewing process, that you might be able to see when your supervisor is submitting the journal paper to the journal. But then it has a very rigorous peer review process, and from what I have heard, that most people who are really hotshot, like big shot in that field, people who have worked in that field, people who have received a considerable number of publications, people who have submitted a considerable number of publications in that field, they are the people who are actually considered to be the editors or reviewers. So they are reviewing entire work, and even if they have not done the experiments themselves, they have that much experience to look at something and see if this person is bluffing or not. they have that experience, they can see that this experiment will not work out. And even if this experiment is working out, this with this experiment you cannot prove this, you cannot show that this is happening because of this one experiment. So they have that much experience. So that is why people trust them as reviewers. And even after all this, there are papers that get published without any proper, some papers, I think you might most of you might be aware that some papers get retracted after publication. So those papers get published? Because people who were reviewing probably didn't raise any questions, and then they thought the paper was fine, and those get published. And then I think a year or 2 years later, some random person on some random website might raise a question, and if that question has some solid base, other people will also start raising questions. And then if that reaches a considerable if that creates a considerable buzz, the institute will ask the authors to replicate, like reproduce the experiment what they have done. So there are major institutes where papers in like very famous journals have been retracted. So you see, and that paper might have been online for 1 year or 2 year, and there might be other scientists, other researchers who might have taken information from those paper, and after 2 years those papers got retracted. So I always wonder, how does this work out? If I'm working on an experiment and I take information from a paper, and I take information from the paper, I see the protocol of that paper and I follow it, and I'm working on my own. But then 2 years later, that particular paper gets retracted. So then how does this person who has already started work based on that paper go ahead? So that is one of the questions that I have. But even then, you can see even people who are like really big shots in their field might miss some very minute things and actually give out a paper for publication without, and even that thing might not be authentic. So the point I'm making is, even peer reviewed journals can be retracted afterwards. So obviously any random website should be questioned. Then the other thing that you should question is, can the webmaster or source be contacted from the website by email? So if you're reading an article, can you contact the person who has written the article? If you have any further queries, will that person be available to address those queries? Then this is about the authority, about the authorships. Then the accuracy of what the information you're taking. So do these authors give credit for information using sites? Is there a bibliography? So references is something, giving reference is something that is very important in at least in science. From what I've seen, it should be very important. Some people have really worked hard to gather that information. You cannot just use that information without giving that person enough credit. So reference is very important. So otherwise that counts as plagiarism. If you're not giving someone enough credit for what they have done, that is plagiarism. So if you're reading through an article, do they have proper references? The things that they're mentioning, are these things properly do these things have other information to back these up? So you should always check that, is there a bibliography or reference section in any article. Obviously in scientific journals there will be, but if you're reading any random article on the internet, even then you should check. And is the statistical information labeled clearly, and is it easy to read? Does the site include grammatical, spelling, or typographical errors? One easy giveaway is that if there are a lot of grammatical or spelling or typographical errors, probably the site is not authentic. So that is another when you're searching for anything on the website, you should always keep this in mind. So are there any errors of this kind? And when was the site last revised? Is it clear how often the site is updated? So I have seen on some websites it is very clearly mentioned when it has been last updated, but some other sites, they don't have this information. So please do check these things before you move ahead. Then then appropriateness. What is the purpose of the site? To inform, to persuade, to entertain. So most sites go for promotional stuff. So you should check if this site is promoting something, or is it just for information, like just for disseminating information, or is it for entertainment purposes? And who is the intended audience? What is their target audience? And why is the author presenting the information? Is the content of the site appropriate for what I am looking for my class or my assignment, for whatever? Then you should move ahead to objectivity. Is more than one side of the topic or issue presented? How fair are the authors? Are they giving some biased opinion? If you're looking for something, if you're looking for the suppose you're looking searching for the difference between two things, and you go to the website and you see the author who has written the article is very much biased towards one option. So you should see that if both the topics or both the perspectives are presented properly, or if the author is showing some kind of biasness. And to what extent does the site present opinions versus facts? Very important. When you're writing facts, you should always have substantial data to back you. If I'm writing some facts, then I should have references properly cited that I have taken this fact from this particular paper. But if I'm giving my opinion, I believe like this, then obviously that won't have any references. So that is also very important. You should check if what you're reading are just random opinions or is there any factual basis to it. Then does the site reflect a bias? Is there advertising of any kind on the website? If so, is it clearly differentiated? I already mentioned there's an author who's writing whatever you're reading. Is he or she representing both sides of the coin, or is there any kind of advertising or promotional content going on? And even if so, they should clearly demarcate that this is what we are promoting and this is what is the some websites which are selling reagents. Suppose you're working in a chemistry or biology lab, we have to buy reagents, so we can always go and search in the company's website. So they are always obviously they are promoting their products on the website, but they also write there is something called there's a certificate of the lot, like how the particular lot has worked out. There's a product sheet along with the product image and everything. So obviously they're promoting their products, they're asking you to buy it, but at the same time they have a product sheet to let you know about all the basically all the details about the product and how you should move ahead with the product. There are some websites that even give you links for the protocols. They give links that these are the journals, these are the papers that have already used our product, and you can always check their scientific research. So that is more authentic, right? If you're willing to buy a product and you're not sure that I'm going to be investing a lot of lab money onto it, and you're not sure if that product is going to work out, so some websites have these references that this paper has already used our product and you can go through it. That is a very important, especially for people who are researching in molecular biology. I think this is very important because we have to buy antibodies all the time and most of the antibodies don't work out. So in the website only they always mention that these are the papers that have already used our product. You can talk to them, you can read the paper, and even if you have further questions, you can even mail the authors, and most of them reply. They do reply. So if you have any, if you're reading going through a website and if you have any concerns, the email IDs of the author should be mentioned so that you can get in contact with them. So that is another way of seeing if this website or the data or the information presented here is authentic or not. Then what is the scope or coverage? Is the subject matter covered in depth? Is the information on the site well suited to target audience? And does the overall content of the site fit together with the page's subject matter? So obviously all these things you should evaluate before, and especially in scientific communication, you should not believe anything and everything that is on the internet, please, because it's very important that whatever you say is backed up by proper data, because science is only based on data. Science doesn't work out ambiguously. Anything else might, but science does not. So in the context of professional scientific communication, we should always present our data or whatever we are saying very professionally. Even if you're writing an article, if you're adding facts, please do give references, and if you're also believing stuff from the internet, please do check if those sites are authentic or not. So moving on to the next question, one step that is not included in planning a research study is, anybody? Just go through the options and just let me know which can be the most relevant option here. Anybody would like to answer?
Conducting a meta-analysis of the research.
Correct. Conducting a meta. So all the other options are very like they're indispensable. They should be a part of your research study. Identifying a research problem, obviously. Review of current research, very important. Statement of the research question, like the hypothesis, very important. Developing a research plan is very important. Meta-analysis is not is conducted in some instances, but not always. So before that, we'll understand what meta-analysis basically is. So it is basically a statistical procedure for combining data from multiple studies. Like when the treatment, like if you're treating something, when the treatment effect is consistent from one study to the next, and meta-analysis can basically be used to identify this common effect. And when the effect varies from one study to the next, it may be used to identify the reason for the variation. So why do people generally perform a meta-analysis? So decisions about the utility of an intervention or the validity of a hypothesis cannot be based on the results of a single study. As I said before also, reproducibility is very important, and you cannot actually show that a hypothesis is working out based on a single study, because results typically vary from one study to the next. Therefore, a mechanism is needed to synthesize data across studies, like to see if data can be correlated across various studies that have already worked on this, that have already been undertaken. So narrative reviews had been used for this purpose, but the narrative review is largely subjective. Because different experts come up with different conclusions, and becomes impossibly difficult when there are more than a few studies involved. So you can always go through review articles, but review articles also people try to gather information, but at the end they try to give their own opinion. And even review articles do not work out that properly when there's a lot of studies that have already been done in your field, in your topic. So meta-analysis, by contrast, it applies objective formulas, and can be used with any number of studies. So, like pharmaceutical companies use meta-analysis to gain approval for new drugs, with regulatory agencies sometimes requiring a meta-analysis as part of the approval process. And clinicians and applied researchers in medicine, education, criminal justice, psychology, and various other fields, they also use meta-analysis to determine which interventions might work and which ones work best. So it is widely used in basic research to evaluate the evidence in areas as diverse as sociology, even social psychology, finance, economics, political science, ecology, genetics, marketing, etc. So meta-analysis, like even when you're sending out some papers for publication, many journals actually encourage researchers to submit systemic reviews and meta-analysis that summarize the body of evidence on a specific question. And this approach is replacing the traditional narrative review. So, and it also, meta-analysis also plays a very major role in supporting supporting roles in basic papers. So, like for example, if a paper is reporting results for a new primary study, it might include a meta-analysis in the introduction to basically synthesize prior data and help to place the new study in context. So basically, meta-analysis has a lot of role in grant applications, also planning new studies also. But still, people even till today, some people might prefer narrative reviews. So with in context to this question, this answer will be meta-analysis 1, because not every research study includes this meta-analysis step. So the other 4 options are indispensable. You cannot move ahead with the research study if you don't have that meta-analysis, have the other options. So with respect to that, the conducting a meta-analysis of the research is the option that is most relevant to this question. So but you should always if your field requires it, I think some journals explicitly mention that you should provide that with your work. So if your field requires it, you should definitely do it. So that is what meta-analysis is all about. Moving on, next question. Sources of researchable problems can include researchers' own experiences as educators, practical issues that require solutions, theory and past research, all of the above. Anyone?
All of the above.
Yeah, correct.
All of the above.
Yes. So research problems can come out of anywhere. Even your personal and professional experience can lead to research educators. So obviously, people who are doing their doctorate, PhD studies right now, they'll move ahead to do their postdoc studies, and finally, if they want to stay in academia, they will go and apply for faculty positions, and then they'll have their own labs. So in their own labs, mostly researchers either continue what they have done during their postdocs, or if they have any specific area of interest, they work on that. So obviously, researchers' own experience as educators, when they were learning, when they were also working under a supervisor, the things that they have learned from that lab, if they have any further questions regarding that, when they open their own labs, I think they start with that only. So obviously that option works out. Then practical issues that require solutions, definitely practical issues, any epidemic, any pandemic that comes around, people have not been thinking about that too much, but something that requires immediate solutions. Obviously, when the SARS-CoV-2 pandemic hit, I'm pretty sure not so many labs were working on SARS-CoV-2 at that point of time. Definitely, the SARS-CoV, I think that hit in 2003. So obviously, some virology labs might have been working on SARS-CoV, but once the pandemic hit in 2019 December, so many labs started working. Even if their major project is not related to virology at all, they started incorporating their own expertise into how they can solve this pandemic issue. Some labs which work on basically some computational labs also, they also started working on SARS-CoV-2. So obviously practical issues, I don't think so many labs were working on SARS-CoV-2 before it hit, but obviously once it hit, people were looking for solutions all around, and obviously so many people started working on SARS-CoV-2. So obviously practical issues that require solutions, definitely. Theory and past research, obviously past research will always influence whatever you're working on. If you have found that interesting, Most faculties I've seen, they try to continue their postdoc, whatever they've done in their postdoc, a little tweak here and there, and they continue that. Some people might have other choices also. So obviously all of these options check out for this question, all of the above. Moving on to the next question. A key characteristic of past research that guides researchers in new research questions is that extensive research conclusively and definitely answers research questions. Studies typically generate more research questions than they ever answer. Anybody? Anybody would like to try?
B, studies typically generate more questions.
Yes, correct.
Questions than
Correct.
they answer.
So the question itself is quite self-explanatory. What is the thing that what is the thing in past research that guides researchers in new question? Even when we are studying, even if we are looking for looking to write a statement of purpose, we select a topic, then we go to PubMed or whatever database we are looking at, and then we search relevant articles on that topic, and then we try to read those, and then we try to find a gap, any kind of research gap that might be there that has not been answered yet, and then we plan our research experiments in a way so that we can answer that. But mostly any study that you do will obviously generate more research questions than the answer. So even if you're doing an advanced degree like PhD, you're working on a particular question for 5 years, and at the end of it, you'll see that the most the most prominent result from your research was that it generated many more questions than you could ever answer. So that is how science moves on. I think it never stops. It's a never ending cycle, and that's what makes it interesting and fascinating, because nobody can answer everything all at once. So when you do stuff, you are actually bombarded with new questions, and people, either you or other new people, can continue that study. So definitely a key characteristic of past research will be that it generates more research question than they can answer. You're correct. So next question is, which of the following is a function of theory? Integrating and summarizing current knowledge, making predictions, explaining phenomena. All of the above are important functions of theory. So
All of the above are important functions of theory.
correct. So the functions of theory are description, prediction, explanation, and guidance. So first you describe, then you predict. You have some predictions, you have some hypotheses that this might be what is happening. Then you try to explain. You conduct experiments, and you try to explain your data. You try to interpret whatever you have seen, and then you can obviously guide if there's future scope regarding whatever work you have done. So this is what these are the functions of theory. It has an organizing and summarizing phenomena. Definitely, it focuses on attention on important variables and relationships. It clarifies terms and relationships. It guides observations, tells us what counts as a valid measure. It gives us grounds for predictions. So it gives us grounds, it gives us data to predict something, to hypothesize, to write down hypotheses, basically hypothesis. And it has a unique insight and new ways of you can actually have a new perspective of thinking, and it helps us communicate about the phenomena, gives control about our field, about whatever we have been working on. So yes, you are right. Next question. Review of literature prior to formulating research questions allows the researcher to do which of the following? To become familiar with prior research on the phenomenon of interest, to identify potential methodological problems in the research area, to develop a list of pertinent problems relative to the phenomena of interest.
All of the above.
Yeah, correct. So obviously that is why we undertake. Yes, correct. That's why we undertake literature review. So whenever you are actually writing down a research plan, I think literature review is the first step. You go ahead and you read whatever work has been done, because there's no point if you don't read whatever has already been done. Then you probably might have been you might have been having the same question that has already been addressed years before. So that can happen also. Like you're working on something and you find out literature that it has been already, these questions have been addressed years before. So obviously if you don't do literature review before starting out a work, that's not a very fruitful way of doing research, because your question might have been addressed. So you go through literature review and you try to see, you become familiar with what the prior research has already happened. You see what are the techniques they have used, how they have basically plotted their data, how they have interpreted their data, and what are the open-ended questions that they have written in the future scope section. Then you identify potential problems in the research area. Um,
Your
what
internet is getting lag, I think.
Okay. Which slide can you see?
Yeah, now it is okay.
Okay,
I
okay.
can
Thank
see.
you. Thank you so much for. I last day also it was happening. I'm not sure why is it happening, but okay. Hopefully it'll be not be a problem. So yeah. So obviously you, yeah, obviously you go to the literature review. You identify potential methodological problems in the research area. It's actually a very good habit to go through research papers and try to find out the limitations. What most people, research papers I have read, when they are writing the discussion section and they are talking about future scope, they also try to mention the limitations of their study. I don't think that brings down the importance of your study in any way. It actually gives a very broad overview to the readers that this is the work that has been done, this was the question that we were having and we were trying to answer, but keep in mind there are also limitations to the study. So some research papers might not have the limitation section, and some people might think that it brings down the importance of your study, but it doesn't. Trust me, when readers read your paper and they see that you have clearly mentioned some of the limitations, then they understand that even you are aware of what the shortcomings of your work might be. And that is a really great concept, that you are actually letting the world know, because that is how science will progress. You're letting everyone know that we have done this, but there are some problems in this also. So be sure to keep check that in mind. So I was reading some paper regarding SARS-CoV-2, and they have worked on cell culture and everything on the in vitro systems. If you know what in vitro systems is like, not on any animal, they have taken cells and they have cultured it. Basically in lab everything has happened, they're not working on any animal. So actually had a lot of interesting findings, but at the end they also wrote that we did not do any in animal work, in vivo work, which is inside in the animal work. We have done everything on cells, and we know that whatever data we have gathered from this lab system that we have maintained, these data might not be extrapolated to humans. So we have checked whatever is happening using some drugs and everything, but obviously we know that this is the shortcoming of our work, because these cannot be directly extrapolated to humans. Even when people are getting even when new drugs go for clinical trials, obviously those obviously with all the ethical concerns fulfilled and taken care of, those are tested on animals, murine models, even I think some even go for primates or anything. I'm not really in that very sure about that field, but obviously murine models is a very common. Murine is mouse, basically mouse model is a very common in animal system that people use other guinea pigs and primates. So even then you cannot be 100% sure that how the mouse is reacting to this drug, even humans will react similarly to this drug. You cannot be sure from humans reaction also. One particular person might be reacting in a particular manner to this drug, a different person might be reacting in a completely different way to the drug. So yes, the because of other comorbidities that we have, because of other diseases, because of might be their medical history or whatever. But the point was, what I'm trying to say is that literature review is very important, and you can actually go through the limitations of the study if they have mentioned in the paper itself. And obviously the third point is to develop a list of pertinent problems related to the phenomenon of interest. So yes, you are actually reading through research articles regarding a topic that you find interesting, and once you read through the research articles, you are bound to find some gaps in the work that have been shown, that have been already addressed, or the questions that have already been addressed. So obviously literature review is very important with respect to all these four options. Great. So next question. Sometimes a comprehensive review of the literature prior to data collection is not recommended by grounded theorists. I'll tell you what we mean by grounded theory, but can anyone at least try to take a guess?
it's false.
Okay, so you're saying it's false, like literature review is always recommended. So even I thought so, because literature review is very important part of any kind of research, but this is actually true. Some grounded theorists actually recommend that you should not be very rigorous in your literature review. So I'll say what a grounded theory is basically. It's mostly in accounting research, but in general also. So the aim of all research is to advance, refine and expand a body of knowledge, establish facts and research, basically reach new conclusions using systematic inquiry and discipline methods. And the research design is a plan or strategy that researchers use to answer the research question, which is underpinned by philosophy, methodology and methods. So there's someone called Burks who has defined philosophy as a view of the world encompassing the questions and mechanisms for finding answers that inform that view. And researchers reflect their philosophical beliefs and interpretations of this world prior to commencing research. They actually reflect their interpretations before commenting, before even starting research. And methodology is the research design that shapes the selection and use of particular data generation and analysis methods to answer this research question. So while a distinction between positivist research and interpretivist research occurs at the most paradigm level, each methodology has explicit criteria for the collection. Now, grounded theory is basically a structured uh, yet flexible methodology, and this is not really this is actually, this methodology is appropriate when very little is known about a particular phenomena. When you don't have that much knowledge about a particular phenomena, that's when this theory is more appropriate. And the aim is basically to produce or construct an explanatory theory that uncovers the process inherent to the like substantive area of interest, area of inquiry. And that's why one of its defining characteristics is that it aims to generate theory that is grounded in the data. So one of the like literature review, the timing of literature review is something that many people raise questions about in this grounded theory. So some research methodologies like qualitative research methodologies use the literature to identify basically theoretical frameworks and employ these to direct and interpret study findings. And grounded theories differ in their approach to literature reviews by actively seeking, they don't want to be, basically they don't want to be influenced by preconceived ideas. So it is most appropriate when very little is known about the thing that you're studying, and they don't really prefer doing this because they don't want to be influenced by preconceived ideas of an area, and instead they want to generate theory based on their studies data. So by delaying a formal literature review, the grounded theorist basically seeks to prevent imposing existing theories or knowledge on data. Notwithstanding, the literature review should be tailored to the specific purpose at hand. So this is what grounded theory is all about. So their basic notion, their basic reasoning behind not doing proper literature review is that they do not want to be influenced by prior data. But if you're talking about science communication, I think comprehensive review of literature is very important. So science communication, scientific research cannot move ahead without proper review of literature, because that is just not possible. So I think that concept does not really apply on science according to my point of view. There might be people who have another points, other perspectives, but this is
Yes,
what
I,
yeah,
I have answered this question keeping in mind that only.
yeah, correct.
Because anyways, if you are you don't have the prior literature knowledge, then how do you
Yes,
understand that it is
yes,
an
correct.
area of research?
Or not, correct.
Yeah.
Even I have that point of view. So science should not really encourage this kind of studies. But it's also what I saw on the internet also, that grounded theory, this technique mostly works out for things that we know very little about. But if you don't go through review of literature, how will you know if this thing has been addressed before or not? That was my question as well. So obviously this does not, I think this is more towards other kind of studies, qualitative studies. For scientific, mostly quantitative studies are uh, there in science. So I think for that you need comprehensive review of literature. That's very important. Correct. So next question is that what kind of ideas cannot be empirically researched? Anybody? Anybody would like to answer? So empirical research, according to my knowledge, will be something that is based on observation or something that can be measured, things like that. So after that, anybody will like to try?
So values and morality such as correctness of having prayer in the school.
Correct. Anybody else? Anybody else has any other viewpoint, any other answer? Nobody? So yes, empirical research is basically based on observation and measurement of phenomena as directly experienced by the researchers. So out of all these options, option C is the most relevant, because this is something that you cannot really measure or cannot really observe. This is something that is very, it's a very abstract thing. I don't know,
So very
correct?
subjective
Subjective,
sort of.
correct, subjective thing. It's nothing, it's not something that can be easily measured or observed,
Quantified.
quantified or something like that. So out of all the four options, you're correct. Option C will be something that cannot be empirically researched. So we'll talk a little bit about conceptual research and empirical research. So conceptual research is basically that is a type of research that is generally related to abstract ideas or concepts. But empirical research is where conclusions of the study are drawn from direct evidence, and it is verifiable by observation or experience rather than theory or pure logic. So you have seen something that can be measured, that can be quantified, as you said, that is more inclined towards empirical research. So it involves phenomena that are observable and measurable. You cannot measure really the issues. What was the option? The issues of values and morality, such as correctness of having a prayer in school. It's very subjective. Some people might be against it. Some people might be for it. So it's not nothing that can be very easily observable and measurable. Nothing that is universal. On the other hand, conceptual research is it involves factual. It involves abstract data and concepts, and it doesn't really involve any practical experiments. And conceptual research philosophical research is an example, while empirical research includes both qualitative and quantitative studies. Next, which of the following is not a database containing information to be used during literature review? So this is not a totally scientific thing. So these are some of the databases that talk about social sciences as well. So I'll say this because I don't know if anybody will know this. So all of the above are potentially useful databases. ERIC, PsycInfo, Sociophiles. As I said, this is not exactly scientific science knowledge, but these are all. ERIC is like a wide variety of journal sources, and the coverage of an approved journal source is determined by examination of 3 to 5 current issues during the source review process, but may be updated at any time. So this is also a very popular database. Then we have PsycInfo. It talks about some psychology, covering the behavioral and social sciences from the authority in psychology. And then so these are some of the like ERIC and PsycInfo, these Sociophile, these come under the humanities section. For science section, I think PubMed is a very important database. We have Google Scholar, we have PubMed, we have Scopus. Scopus is a very important database. If you go on Scopus and if you just you can actually basically screen through the papers. So suppose you write a few keywords. Suppose you want to search about Mycobacterium tuberculosis. So you write the bacteria's name, and then you have various process to screen. You can actually say after 2021, any paper that has been published after 2021, that is what you want to search for. And then you can actually choose the journals also. Like if you want to read only nature papers, you can actually choose that. You can also select review or research articles. You can select a lot of things. So I suggest you go back, all of you, if you have not checked out Scopus yet, it's an amazing website. You just go and type Scopus and you write your keyword, and they will try to get research papers most relevant to your keyword search, and you can screen through it. You can actually narrow down your the paper search using these things, like very recent or moderately recent or old, and all of this. You have a lot of options. I am not able to remember properly. I think the year one is there, the journal one is also there. Which journal you want to actually sorry, someone was coming. Which journal you want to actually look in, and all of these things are there. So do go back and check Scopus. Also PubMed and Google Scholar, these are also very important databases for scientific communication, basically science. So next question, this is also very basic. Computer database searches can be done with all of the above. Basically computer database searches, it's a not that important a question. So yeah. So next question is, the feasibility of a research study should be considered in light of cost and time required to conduct the study, skills required of the researcher, potential ethical concerns.
All the above.
Correct. So everything should be kept in mind when you are actually writing down a research plan. Cost and time required to conduct the study, obviously, because your lab, if you are a research student working in a particular lab, your lab will have a particular funding, and you cannot actually go beyond that funding. You have to work within that funding. So cost is very important. Regardless of what people say, funding stops people's experiments. Like they have seen people who had to stop their experiments because their lab fund got over, or they could not afford to buy new reagents or stuff. So funding is very important in science. Everything is secondary. Like it might sound shallow, but funding is very important when you're conducting experiments, especially wet lab experiments like in chemistry, biology, when you need reagents to work through. In computational work, I don't think funding is that important. If you have a good system, good computer, good laptop, I think that works out. But for wet lab experiments, funding is very important. People don't get to complete their work because of funding. Time is also very important. Time is money. So obviously you cannot spend your entire life working on a project. You have to give it a definite time. Like this is the time I intend to give, like if not a project, at least some objectives. If you have narrowed down your work into some objectives, you'll have to narrow down your, you'll have to define a limited amount of time for that particular objective. Skills required of the researchers also very important. You cannot think of an experiment that requires very high-fi instruments that your institute doesn't have, or high skills that you don't have. Skills can still be acquired, chalo. Skills you can learn, you can actually learn from an operator, you can learn from a technician, but even that takes time. You cannot like these skills are not transferable within a week or something. You actually need time to work with very very expensive instruments of that sort. Skills can still be acquired, but instruments and all that stuff, you need to be very sure about that. So nowadays people send their samples to, like, not all institutes have can afford high level instruments, so people send their samples to other institutes. So here we see samples coming from all over the country. Even samples come from ISERs and all that. Even though ISERs have, I'm from IIT Bombay. Even ISERs have very, they have very high-fi instruments, obviously. But then also, if their instrument is not working for a particular period of time, their instrument has gone bad or something, it's down or something, the lab send their samples here. So here samples come from all over the country. So obviously instrument people are now going out of their way to send samples to other institutes, and this transport process is also very difficult because some samples need to be kept at particular temperatures. And then potential ethical concerns, definitely. Ethical concerns, I think, work the most when you're working with animal models. So obviously you need to sign everything, you need to get permission and all that to work with these things. So I think ethics is also a very important part of scientific research. So yes, all of the above. Next question. A formal statement of the research question or purpose of research study generally. Anybody? Anybody would like to try? Yes.
It is made after the literature review. So B and C.
Correct. Correct. So obviously literature review, that's why we said ki scientific communication with literature review is very important. You cannot really propose a study, like a study area, or propose a hypothesis before literature review. That doesn't really work out practically, because what you're suggesting might already have been published years back. So obviously it's made after the literature review, and obviously it will help guide the research process. Like whatever your objective is, that will define how you move ahead with your experiments. So B and C, definitely. So this is a sketch to show you the part to research problem. So from broad topic to a specific question. So the topic that you're searching for will be very broad domain. You'll be searching for something that is very broad. Obviously you'll not have that much knowledge before you start your literature review. Then you'll do preliminary research on that topic. Then you'll get some working knowledge on that topic. You'll go through preliminary research. You'll find what are the stuffs that have already been done, what are the questions that have already been addressed, and these are the questions that are remaining. Then you'll move ahead to working questions like problematization, gap spotting. That's what people generally say, like you'll find gaps in that research, and then you'll move ahead with then you'll evaluate, then you'll propose the hypothesis, you will define the problem, you will define the objectives, and then you'll basically move ahead to experiments to evaluate whatever, to see the questions that you are targeting is worth it or not. Sometimes people change their objectives after conducting experiments only. Sometimes people have very narrow objectives and they start their work with that, but then after some time they realize that these objectives are not being addressed. And obviously, as I said, people don't have much time, because you have to have some work during a project tenure. So that time they also change their objectives, so it goes back, so that process goes back to the literature review part, and then you figure out newer objectives and newer techniques to address those questions. So yes, that is basically from broad topic to specific question. This is how you move forward. So next question. Is the following qualitative research purpose statement well stated or poorly stated? The focus of the present study was to explore distressing and nurturing encounters of patients with caregivers and to ascertain the meanings that are engendered by such encounters. The study was conducted on one of the surgical units and the obstetrical or gynecological unit of a 374 bed community hospital. Is it well stated or is it poorly stated? What do you think?
Poorly stated.
Poorly stated.
Yeah.
Why do you think so? Your answer might be correct. Well, I thought it is quite well stated, but why do you think it's poorly stated? As I said, these questions don't really have a specific answer. Nothing has been written on stone. So if you say it's poorly stated, that's also correct. But why do you think so? Do you think there's some more information that should have been there?
It doesn't seem to be well structured when I see to it. The focus of the present study was to explore distressing and nurturing encounters of the patients with the care. Uh, I think it is elaborate. It
They
could
should
be
be more elaborate.
something crisp with
Okay.
words.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. Correct. That can be also the case. I'm not from this field, so I did not understand much properly. So I thought it might have been well stated. But now that you say it, it can be. We can say that like there should be a little more elaboration on the part. There could be a little more specific things that could have been mentioned. So with that regards, you can say that it is poorly stated. Someone who's from actually from this field or who has been working in this regard will be able to say more. If this is how people write papers, if this is how people give out information in their field or not. But yes, I think your like the way you defended why you're saying poorly stated, I think that checks out. So as I said before, and I'll say again, so there's no particular correct answer. Like I thought this might be well stated because I thought most of the things are explained over here, like what bed and what unit and everything. But then also it could have been more structured and crisp, like she said. So with that, in that respect, it's not that well stated. So you can have opinions of your own. There's obviously also it's a qualitative research purpose statement. So I'm not really in this field, so I did not understand. Some people who will be working in this field will be able to give more information about it. So it can be any of the two options, whatever you think might be right. It's possible. So we'll move on to the next question. Which of the following quantitative research questions is superior? What is the effect of participation in various extracurricular activities on academic performance? Or what effect does playing high school football have on students' overall grade point average during football season? Anybody?
B.
B. And why B?
Because in the point B, it is being asked what is the average. So basically, this is about numbers, and probably quantitatively, this can be substantiated as compared to A,
Correct.
because in A, he is only asking various
Correct.
extracurricular activity, but no quantification.
Correct. So, absolutely correct, whatever you said. So, since the question is about quantitative research, B is much more specific. It actually talks about which extracurricular activity you are focusing on. It talks about high school football. So, you have a clear idea of the extracurricular activity that he or she is asking about, and then you know how to, like, there's a overall grade point average is mentioned. So how does playing football have on students? Is playing football hampering people's academic performance? Is playing football increasing their concentration? I've heard that being active in sports might actually help in your concentration in academic performance also. And I have seen that in my own performance. So yes, so that happens. So not always that extracurricular activities do not always hamper your studies. Mostly these things can actually have a very good impact on your academic performance as well. So the second question is much more relevant, much more specific. It actually talks about the extracurricular activity that you want to know about. It's focusing on only one extracurricular activity. Also, it has a very quantitative aspect because it's asking about overall grade point average. The first question is very vague. It's talking about extracurricular activities in general. It can be singing, dancing, football, volleyball, anything. And academic performance also is a very vague concept. What is academic performance? Like whatever grade points you're getting in your exams, or is like interacting during classrooms is also called academic performance. So it's a very vague. The first question is all in all very vague. Quantitative research, with respect to quantitative research, the second question is much more relevant, much more specific. So what you said was absolutely correct. Yes. So moving on to the next question, a statement of quantitative research question should extend the statement of purpose by specifying exactly the questions the researcher will address, help the researcher research in selecting appropriate participants, research methods, measures and materials, specify the variables of interest. Anybody?
All the above.
Okay. So yes, a statement of quantitative research should obviously do all of these. So you have to extend the statement of purpose, which is like you have to define the questions that the researcher is trying to address, at least the gap that the researcher is trying to fulfill, the objectives that he or she will be having during the course of the study, and that will help the research in selecting appropriate participants. Obviously, research methods, measures. Once you have the objective clear, you'll have research methods and whatever materials you want to move ahead with. For that, also literature review is very important because prior literature work will only help you in your research, and obviously specify the variables of interest, that is also very important. So this will also be all of the above. So the research participant.
Ma'am, just a request. Can
Yes,
you
yes.
go back two questions?
This
I
one.
wanted to see the obstetrics gynecology related question. I missed it somehow due to some network issues.
Okay. Yes, this one. Yeah. Do you want to try this? I just check.
Uh, what is the correct answer for this?
So there is no correct answer. Basically, in this course, let me tell you, there is no correct answer as such. Nothing has been written on stone except the very objective questions. Other things can be very, relative and subjective. So, like, uh, according to, like, when I read it, I thought it was well structured because many things have been mentioned here. But someone here said that it should have been more crisp and concise. I also agree with that. So what do you think is the right answer? Because there is no correct answer to this. Someone from this field
I
might
think
be able to answer correctly. Yes.
I think it is P. It is poorly
Poorly
stated.
stated.
Here,
Okay.
yeah, it is here. They have not given a clear-cut objective. They
Hmm.
have mentioned the study center where
Correct.
they are going to conduct the study, but what was the actual research question that is not stated.
Correct.
That's
Correct.
it. I wanted to see that only. Thank you
Ha,
so
ha,
much.
ha, no problem. Yeah, I think that you're correct. When you're talking about research purpose statement, you don't only give an introduction, you also talk a little bit about what you will be working on, which is basically the objective. I guess, yeah, that also. Your point and whatever other person mentioned when we were discussing this, her point was also
Thank you,
very
ma'am.
valid. Yes, yes, her point was also very valid. So, both of your points are very valid. So, yes, a little bit of the objective should have been nice. Would have been nice. So, this with that concept in mind, this is not a really well structured research purpose, like statement of purpose basically. So the research participants are described in detail in which section of the research plan? Introduction, method, data analysis, discussion. Anybody? With respect to science
Method.
communication, correct.
Method.
With respect to science communication, the research participants and everything, if you're working on samples from different hospitals, for example, if you have taken samples from hospitals, from patient blood samples, urine samples, anything, so you describe all of these things in the method section. You give an idea about these things in the abstract and introduction. You might say that we have monitored this many patients and this many things, but everything that's related, like described in detailed, as is mentioned in this question, the research participants, their age, gender, any demographic things, everything you mention in detail in the method section, definitely. So, and also the method sections are generally very elaborate and very detailed, and the main purpose of that is so that anybody else who's reading the published paper can also replicate, like reproduce the experiment that you have done. So that's why method section is very important, and people generally read the method section at the end. If I am reading something related to my topic, I'll go to the abstract section first, as I mentioned before also. Abstract is the most important, according to me. Abstract is the most important because that makes or breaks your paper. It basically defines if you're reading through the paper or not. Then people generally skim through the paper, they don't read in detail. They skim through the paper, they see the like graphs and the plots and everything. If you have done some work of that kind before, you will be able to understand from the graphs a little bit at least. and then you read the future, like the conclusion and discussion part. And then if these things interest you, if you think that reading through this paper will help in my research, that is when you go back and read the method section, because method section will be very detailed and very elaborate and mostly very difficult to understand. If you want to reproduce that experiment, you'll have to read through the method section time and again. It will be mostly very difficult to understand, because most papers don't write very in a very layman language. They use very technical terms, and if you're not from that field, it might be very difficult for you to understand. But obviously, if you're reading through the method section, you're probably from that field, and you're probably trying to use that method section for your own research. So that's why method section is very detailed. But that's because the purpose is that other people can replicate the work. Yes.
Correct, the chronology of reading any research paper.
Yes.
First is the abstract, then all the diagrams and whatever the graphs has been given. That
You
is.
you want me to say, or do you want, like, I think this
No, no,
differs. Huh.
I'm just supporting.
Ha
I'm
ha,
just
correct.
agreeing to what you said.
Correct. Like I think every person has their own technique of reading papers. When I started reading papers, I could not read more than 2 lines at a stretch, because it would bore me a lot. Like, I would take a lot of interest in classes and discussions, but research papers, when I was in my undergrad, research papers, I was starting to read out research papers, and basically those were boring because I could not understand anything. My knowledge was also very limited. We did not know a lot of science at that point of time. We just came from school and was, I think, in my first or second year of undergrad. So it was very difficult for me to understand, and obviously I did not understand, so I lost all interest in reading it. So that's when a senior helped me. So they were like, you do not read through the research paper at the first glance. That's not how you do it, because you even, that senior was doing their PhD at that point of time. So quite like seniority basis pay, they were quite, he was quite a senior. So he was like, you do not read through research paper like that at your first stage, mostly when you're starting out, because it will bore you out and you will eventually lose your interest in it. So how do you go through it? You read the abstract first, and if you, like, mostly in the abstract also, when you're starting out, you won't understand a lot of things. You have to go back to Google and search what does this thing mean, what is this thing, because at that point of time you don't have much basic knowledge as well. So when you're starting out, what does this mean, what does this receptor and all, why is it so important, why is it how is cell signaling related to receptor? All these things we might have read through this in textbooks, or very theoretically. How these things apply to research, we were not aware of at that point of time. So you have to go back to Google and search. So first you read through the abstract. Now with time, as you read more and more papers, as you work with work experiments yourself, we'll be able to realize, at least get a little bit. But still, reading research papers is very difficult and sometimes quite boring as well, very honestly. And writing a research paper is an art. I don't think anybody can do it, because you have to make it very crisp. You cannot use flowery language. You have to make it very crisp, and you cannot use very strong vocabulary. It's not an English essay. You cannot use very strong vocabulary. If I have to go back to the dictionary in every sentence, I'd probably lose interest. So that's also a very important art. So that senior taught me that you read the abstract first, and then you try to skim through the paper. You go to the at when you're starting out, I think people won't understand anything from the graphs if you're because you're starting out. But once you reach that level, you can go to the, you read the abstract, you know what this study is little about. Then you go to the pictures, you go to the legends of the pictures, like what this graph entails. You see the x-axis, you see the y-axis. So they are increasing the concentration of this drug on the x-axis, and this is how this variable, this parameter is getting affected by that has been shown in the y-axis. You try to relate that, and then you read through the legends of the images of the uh, graphs or whatever pictures they have tried to give in their paper. Then you, once you have done that, you have skimmed through the some of the topics, then you go through the conclusion section. What do you think the conclusion of the study is? Then you read through the discussion future scope thing, or you might skip that. At least read the conclusion thing, and if that interests you, then you go back and read the research paper. This time you read each and every line properly. You go through the methods. If you want to replicate that experiment, you go through the methods and all that. So that is how that senior has taught me how to read a research paper, and I still follow this to this date, because this has helped me. This technique has helped me. But I'm pretty sure other people have other different people have different ways to read a paper. I have seen people who read the entire paper properly, word to word, in the first go itself, and that works out for them. So that's pretty fine. So once you start reading out research paper, it's important how you choose how to read. I also used to do that, but I did not understand anything. So that senior helped me in this way. I do this now. I skim through the paper, and then if I find that interesting, then I go back and read it. So also you read research papers, you see something, a sentence that maybe sounds interesting to you. You see the reference. All the research papers, they'll have proper references, citations. You go to the reference and you go in the reference section, then you go to another paper. This is another thing that another senior has taught me, that you always check the references. If you're taking out one particular sentence, if you think one particular sentence fascinates you with respect to your research, go back to that reference, to that paper, and read it. So yes, I think this varies. It comes with experience. I don't think anything else. Experience, talking to seniors, talking with seniors, it supervises everything. So that is how it works out. But for different people, it's their own choice how they prefer reading research papers. Definitely. Yes, thank you for the question. So we'll move on to the next question. Research hypotheses are formulated prior to a review of literature. Statements of predicted relationships between variables stated such that they can be confirmed or refuted. And D is B and C. Anybody?
Formulated prior to a review of literature.
Research hypothesis.
No, sorry.
Read the options and take your time. There's no hurry.
It will be B and C.
Anybody else? Yes, you're right. It will be and C. So research hypotheses are not generally, are formulated after the review of literature. Prior to the review of literature, you might have a hypothesis in mind, but as we said, for scientific work, it's always advised to go through a review of literature. You might have many questions in your mind, but most of these questions might already have been addressed before. So there's no point working on those questions again when they have already been addressed and published. So research hypothesis, the thing objective what you are planning to work on, most of these are formulated after the review of literature. That's how it works out. And obviously it shows the statements of predictive, like if you're talking about some variables and parameters, you might hypothesis, basically prediction. You're predicting something. So obviously you're predicting this some relationship with variables. You're predicting that you have studied from another paper that this drug has this effect on these tissues or cells. So you're predicting that if you work with this drug, which is also a similar drug to this kind of drug, it might also have a similar kind of result, consequence or something like that. So that is a prediction. Predicting relationship between the variables. So predicting relationship between the drug concentration and the cell viability or cell death measurement, whatever you're working on. Then obviously it is stated such that it can be confirmed and refuted. Hypothesis is not something that has been written on stone. It's not a law. It's not a rule. It's something that you're predicting from your prior literature review. You're hypothesizing that this thing works out because that you have read that thing has worked out in that case. So it's definitely something that can be confirmed and refuted. And trust me, many people have finished their even PhD projects with by refuting the hypothesis that they started out with. I think I said this story in the last session also, that someone started with a hypothesis and instead of confirming their hypothesis, they actually ended up refuting that hypothesis. But that's also research. Negative results are also results. So that's something that many people have told me, that don't be disheartened by negative results. Negative results are not negative results. Negative results are something that you did not expect. Those are unexpected results, but those are also results. So maybe that's how it's supposed to be. So some people, I know some people have finished their project by refuting the hypothesis they started out with. So yes, that's also something that research hypothesis can be confirmed or refuted, definitely. Moving on to the next question. Hypotheses in qualitative research studies usually are very specific and stated prior to the beginning of the study, are often generated as the data are collected, interpreted and analyzed, are never used, are always stated after the research study has been completed. Anybody? So I'll answer this then. They're often generated. as the data are collected. So in case of qualitative studies, I think like specifying your hypothesis or objective, the hypothesis basically prior to beginning of the study is not really what happens in the normal cases. They're often interpreted as the data are generated, like you generate hypothesis as the data are collected, interpreted and analyzed. Even in quantitative studies, I feel you can have a hypothesis from beforehand, after the literature review and before study, but as you go about gathering more and more data, I think some of your hypothesis might change. There's no hard and bound rule that you have to start with the hypothesis, you have to end your work with the hypothesis. As you keep on collecting data, you see different kinds of results. I think a hypothesis might also change based on that. You cannot have a very hardcore objective in your first year and end your fifth year with the same objective. You can do also, it's nothing like you can't do, but in some instances you can also modify or tweak your hypothesis a little bit based on the preliminary results that you're getting. So yes, this question will be this answer will be B, option B. So qualitative hypothesis generating research, basically they involve collecting interview data from research participants concerning a phenomenon of interest and then using what they say in order to develop hypothesis. And it uses two principles: questioning rather than measuring. It's qualitative. So remember, there's no concept of measuring at all. So they use these two principles: questioning rather than measuring, and generating hypothesis using theoretical coding. Because the method involves developing hypothesis after the data are collected, it is called hypothesis generating research that rather than hypothesis testing research. So this I got from, I think, a website, but whatever this person is saying makes sense. So they are gathering data and they are generating hypothesis based on the data. So that's why people are more inclined to call it hypothesis generating research rather than hypothesis testing research. A qualitative research does not test but produce hypothesis for future research, and these hypotheses become clear during the initial research. They are the results of the research. The researcher does not know from the beginning what to expect during qualitative research. So the question has been answered here. The researcher does not know. In quantitative research, you have a hypothesis, you have an expectation. Even if that doesn't turn out in the right way in the future, but you have an expectation, we have a prediction. But in qualitative research, you do not test, you actually produce hypothesis with the initial data generation that you have done. So yes, researcher does not really know from the beginning what they expect during qualitative research. Moving on, a research plan should be detailed, should be given to others for review and comments, sets out the rationale for a research study, all of the above. Anybody? Take your time, there's no hurry, and also there's no clear cut answer. If you have a different answer, that's also fine. Just defend whatever you're saying. Why do you think so? That's all. Anybody would like to try?
All the
All the above.
Yes. So yes, so mostly it's all of the above. Research plan should be detailed, obviously. If you are working on something, it should be detailed. Like even if when you're starting out, it's not that detailed because you don't have that knowledge. But like slowly, as you get into the research, as you start getting preliminary data, your research plan starts becoming more structured, more defined, and more detailed, and still more detailed as you move ahead. Then it sets out the rationale for research study. Definitely, a research plan that is why it's called a research plan, because that's your prospective research, that's what you're expected to do. So it sets out the ground for future study, and it should be given to others for review and comments. This varies from people to people, but generally when you're starting out when you're writing your first research proposal, it's always advised that you give it to some trusted senior or trusted supervisor, anybody who obviously has much more experience in this field than yours. So when we were in your undergraduate, when we were doing our undergraduates, we were applying for some science internships to these ISERs and IITs and all these places. They all give out internship advertisements during, I think, the summer season, basically for summer. So they all gave, and we were writing these kind of proposals for the first time. It was a very new concept for us. How do we do literature review? How do we read papers? How do we find out the gap? And how do we write a proposal? It was all very new. And at that time, we used to write even if whatever we have written is scrap, we used to write that and we used to give that to a trusted senior who obviously has much more experience in this field than we have, and they'll be able to give us like proper review, proper suggestion. They'll be saying that you cut down this part, you add more to this part. And trust me, the first research proposal is always crap. When you're starting out, it's always, if you go back and read it now after you have had a lot of experience, you'll realize, you'll laugh at it basically. But that's how people start. I think for everyone it's true. So, but a research plan mostly should be given to others, anyone trusted. Like if you have a proper professor or teacher whom you trust, if you have seniors whom you trust for reviews and comments, it's always very it's always suggestion, always advice that you give them, that to them, and they'll give you proper constructive criticism. They'll criticize your work, but in a constructive manner. They'll say that this is what you should work on and this is not what you should include in a research plan. So that definitely works out. Even when people are writing their thesis, after 5 years of research, when people finally write down their thesis, before submitting they send it to their trusted friends. I've seen it happen myself. My seniors who graduated, they always used to send their thesis after they have finished writing it. They always used to send their thesis to another person, another friend, related, maybe not from exactly from the same field, but at least related to the field, so that they can give them options. Like when you're going through the same thing again and again, you stop seeing the errors in that particular thing. You need someone with a fresh set of eyes, see what you have done. So it's always a good option to give someone your work to someone for reviews and comments, be it a research plan or be it your thesis, be it your project report. Someone that you trust and that you know will give you constructive criticism and reviews and comments for your good. Someone you know will give you comments for your good. So yes, that's something that researchers follow all the time. So next question, the method section of the research plan typically specifies the research participants, the results of prior studies that address the phenomena of interest, the apparatus, instruments and materials for the research study, the planned research procedures. Anyone? Anybody would like to try?
It is C.
Only C. Think about it.
ACT.
Okay.
Research participants, C.
Okay. Anybody else has any conflicting opinion? Yes, so she's correct. It will be ACD. Research participants, especially when you're taking samples from hospitals or stuff like that. Even if you're uh, giving out surveys or anything you do, research participants. I think the age thing, the gender thing, the demographic point of view, everything matters. If you're, especially in case of biology, if you're taking research samples for your work, the age, gender, and these things matter a lot. So obviously the research participants, you might have mentioned in the abstract or introduction part that we monitored 18 people from this place, but in the method section you actually write everything in detail, as I said before also. Obviously that's why A will be included. Apparatus, instruments, materials, definitely that's what method is for. That's the main thing that you write in methods, whatever techniques, whatever materials, instruments you have used. If you have read through research papers where wet lab experiments have been conducted, you'll see that people even actually mention the instrument, company, model, everything they mention. Instrument, company, model. If they're using particular reagents, they write from which company they have taken the reagent. If you're using, suppose, a reagent called A, you'll say A has been procured from Sigma or A has been procured from Thermo Fisher. So people write the company name. Some people even write excessive details like lot number and stuff like that. But company name is, everyone writes company names. Then planned research procedures. Obviously, what the research procedures that you have followed throughout the experiment. Definitely, people cannot replicate your experiment without that. So the method section of the research plan is typically is very detailed, and that's because the purpose is like that only. People should be able to reproduce your work. Yeah. So next question. The introduction section of the research plan gives an overview of prior relevant studies, contains the statement of purpose of the study, concludes with a statement of the research questions, and for quantitative research it includes the research hypothesis, all of the above. Anybody?
For all of the above.
Okay. Yes, it's all of the above. Obviously, if you were in the previous session, we talked about the hourglass model. I think I have the slide. I'll explain it once more if people are interested. So we talked about the hourglass model of scientific research. So the introduction section is generally a little bit broad because it starts with an overview of prior relevant studies. If you're working on TB, you will write a little bit about what with respect to what you're planning to work on. You'll write a little bit of what work has already been done in that field. It's actually very broad domain. Then you'll write the statement of purpose if you study that I have read that these things have already been shown, but this is the aspect that has not been properly shown. It is still not properly understood, and so that's why this is the statement of purpose of the study. Then you'll move ahead with the statement of purpose question, and for quantitative research it will obviously have a research hypothesis. So hypothesis, that we are predicting, basically a prediction that this thing should be doing this and this is what is happening. So the introduction section is generally broad according to the hourglass model as we discussed last time. So yes, the answer will be all of the above. Correct. Moving on to the next question. According to your text, which of the following is not a source of research idea? Everyday life, practical issues, past research, theory, all of the above are sources of research ideas. This also we discussed. There was a similar question like this only. Anybody? It's very self-explanatory. It's like all of the above, right? Anybody wants to answer? It's all of the above. You can get research inspiration from anything and everything in life. So yes, this is also something that we have discussed before. It's all of the above. So yes, the chapter that details the way in which the research was conducted is this is also something we discussed before. Which one do you think is the right answer? Uh,
Research methodology.
yes, correct. So if you're writing in detail how the research was conducted, that's definitely the research methodology section. So yes, that's also something we have discussed before. Okay. So business research has an inherent value to the extent that it helps management make better decisions. Interesting information about consumers, employees, or competitors might be pleasant to have, but its value is limited if the information cannot be applied to a critical decision. What do you think? This is not really relevant to scientific research, it's more inclined towards business, but what do you think? Like common sense, what do you think?
True.
True. Anybody else? Yeah, it's true. Like obviously when you are conducting business research, it's very interesting to have all these data about your consumers, employers. You should have data about your consumers, employees, and you should have data about your competitors, employees, and consumers. But what's the point of it if you cannot apply that to a critical decision? Its value is limited. Like it's good to have this kind of information, but its value is limited if you're not able to apply that to a critical decision. So yes, that's true. Whatever she said is correct. Yes, so the researcher should never report flaws in procedural design and estimate their effect on the findings. True or false? What do you think? If you are in the field of science, what do you think is the correct answer?
True.
True. You think you should never report flaws in procedural design?
Yes, in procedural design, we should not.
Report flaws. Like if you are working on an experiment and you think there are some
In
flaws.
our background, it is false. If there is any flaw, also still we should report. It's other
Anybody?
way.
Anybody else? Any conflicting opinion? Let me know if you have any conflicting opinion. Where it's always the stage is always open to discussion. That's how we learn. I'm not correct most of the time, so just let me know. We'll look into your option as well. So this is false. She's right. According to me, also it's false because sooner or later people will figure out the flaws in your research. There are people reading your paper. There are experienced people reading your paper, and they'll obviously the reviewer who is reviewing your paper will obviously get to the flaws much before than you can. That's why papers come back, right? You submit papers to journals and the reviewers write back that this cannot be said with this experiment. You have to conduct this experiment, or you cannot say this by this. There's a lot of stuff that happens during the reviewing process. So it's always a good idea to at least according to me, I think other people might have other options. I would like to hear what supervisors or what corresponding authors of papers have to say about this. But when I read, as a reader, when I'm reading through the paper, it's always a good idea if things have been mentioned, because if I'm reading through a paper for my own work, I would like to know what shortcomings the researcher uh, researcher thinks there might be. So there are some courses, I think in our institute only, there's a course called research philosophy, where the professor explicitly gives some random research papers and asks the students to talk about the limitations of the paper. So it need not be from your field also. You just can read it and think about some of the limitations of the study just by reading it. What do you think? So these are this is a very good practice, I feel. Even if you are reading a paper, you should always look for the limitations, because it's very important. Most of the papers don't mention explicitly that these are the problems that we face or this is the limitation of our paper, but some papers do. And as a reader, that's I feel happy when I see these kind of sentences, because now I know that this paper also faced these problems, and if I'm going to replicate this work in my research plan, then I should be keeping these things in mind. I should be getting similar kinds of questions during my review process as well. So obviously, according to me also, it's very important that you report if you manage to manage to come across any flaw in your procedural design. Most people don't. We are working on an experiment, we generally don't see the flaw in their experiment. Some others, you might need other people to actually point out the flaw. If you have talking from experience, when there are lab meetings happening every week, right? We have weekly lab meetings. So whenever everyone has to present their work, not every week, there's a proper schedule for that. So when you're presenting your work, generally you don't see the flaws in your work, because you have been reading through it, you have been working on that stuff for so long that you do not see what wrong can happen, and how your work does not explain what you're trying to do. So these lab meetings or these weekly meetings are very important, because that's when, even apart from the supervisor, the other students are also seeing your work, and they are seeing your work for the first time. They do not have prior literature knowledge or anything. Those are fresh pairs of eyes that are criticizing your work, and they'll be like, you did this experiment, but why is this changing when you're doing that? But you're saying that this should not change, so how is this happening? Why does what you're saying does not relate to what you're showing? And why do you think this experiment is enough to answer your question? And most of the times, the people who are presenting, they actually get speechless, because they don't have any answers to that, because they have been thinking in a positive manner about the experiments for so long. It's human behavior. When you're working on something, we know we are working very hard, and we always think in a very positive manner. But when you're starting out, but as you move ahead with time, you get experience, you learn that there are negative aspects of this also. So when you have newer sets of eyes criticizing your work, that's when you realize that, oh, this was what I was doing wrong. So this is also a very healthy, I think this is a very healthy concept. You should always report your flaws, whatever the flaws there might be in your research design, because your reviewer is anybody who's very much more experienced than you. They'll figure it out. So it's not that you're hiding anything. They'll read your paper and figure it out. So that's what I feel is a very healthy practice in science. So I'd suggest, even when you're reading papers, apart from the knowledge that you gain from the paper, the techniques that you learn from the paper, try to make this a practice. Try to find out the limitations of the paper. What do you think might have gone wrong, might be going wrong? Why do you think these results are not that authentic? Any limitation you feel? Why do you think these results cannot be extrapolated to human trials? Because I work in biology basically, so we'll read more papers of this kind. So we have this thing, we always try to figure out if whatever work they have done can be can be extrapolated to humans, and most often than not, it's not possible. So that's it's a very healthy practice to go through papers and find out the limitations of the study as well. Yes. So moving on to the next question. Adequate analysis of the data is the least difficult phase of research for the novice. What do you think? Anybody? If you have tried to analyze data of your work, if you have seen other people do it, what do you think? And novice is someone who's just starting out.
False.
Correct. False. I think analyzing data is the hardest part of doing any wet lab experiment, at least for me. You can actually see the procedures, methods, and materials, everything you can learn from the paper, and you can try to replicate it. But when you have to analyze this, nowadays people are using so many softwares. Learning those softwares is a different thing in itself only. we have a lot of sources also, like YouTube also and all that. But if you want to learn a software properly, I think most of it happens from any seniors or stuff like that. And I think analyzing data is the most difficult, because you have conducted the experiment, but how you present that experiment to the public, how you present that experiment, how you what what is the thing that you interpreted from your experiments, I think that is very tough. And there are a lot of questions that are bound to come from the analysis of your data. How do you want to analyze, do you want to show it in a bar graph, in a box plot, in a whatever, like I know there are different perspectives to different kinds of research. But it's for me, it's the most difficult part of research for the novice, for people who are starting out like me. Anybody? Next question. The validity and reliability of the data should be checked occasionally. Anybody?
False.
Okay, occasionally means sometimes. Okay, so validity and reliability of the data should be checked sometimes. Do you think that's true?
Always it should be
Yes,
checked.
so yeah, so it's false. Yeah, so validity and the reliability of the data should be checked always, because you're building up your next experiment on your previous experiment. And if you have not checked through the validity and reliability of your previous experiment, what is the point of the next experiment? So the validity and reliability should always be checked. So occasionally is not the correct way to go about it. It should always be checked. So that's why this option will be false. So researchers are tempted to rely too heavily on data collected in a prior study, and use it in the interpretation of a new study. What do you think? These are very subjective questions. What they have no answers as such.
False.
False. You think it's false? It's researchers are tempted. Okay. Anybody else? It's fine. Anybody else? What do you think? Do you think
In
so?
my opinion, it's true.
Okay. And some of you think it's false, some of you think it's true. According to me, I think it's true, because I think it's true. If the question would have been researchers should heavily rely, then that would be false. You should not be heavily relying on prior data. But the question is, researchers are tempted to. So I think it's true. Speaking from experience, when we read papers, we always chalk up. That's why we do literature review, right? We read papers to get an idea, and we even subconsciously we actually rely heavily on the previous data when we are interpreting stuff for a new study. So we have a particular mindset, we have some predictions, we have some hypotheses, we have some expectations. And when we're analyzing data, we are basically a little biased towards that hypothesis. Happened with me, so I think that's true. If it's false for you, then great, because you should not be relying too heavily on data collected in a prior study. It should just give you the kick to start your study, but you should not be relying too heavily on data. On one hand, you should not be relying too heavily on data, but on the other hand, prior study is something that if the prior study has already been published, then that is kind of authentic thing. If it has already been published, it has gone through a review process, so you can give it like at least 90% chance that it is correct. Then you think about that study, and when you're conducting a study, you have to in the paper, when you're writing a paper, you have to basically put your work in context to the previous work that has already been done. So that is not relying heavily, that is putting your work in context with the previous work. So that is what researchers should ideally do. You should not rely heavily, but at the same time, you should try to relate those data. If you are getting a different data, then you should have a reasoning to back that up. But this is why I'm getting a different data from what has been shown before. Or if you're getting a similar kind of data, you'll always say that I have this data, and these results are already supported by previously published papers. So great. So you should not rely too heavily. So if the answer is false for you, great. From my personal experience, I have had bias during my study interpretation because of something that I've read before. So that should not be the case. Uh, but but then it is also an art to actually, you have done experiments, you have got the data, but then you have to put it in context of prior study. That is also very important, because when people will be reading your paper, they'll be trying to seek out how has your work helped in our knowledge. The previous work had been published, how has your work helped in getting more knowledge about this stuff, extended, like basically expanded our knowledge regarding this. They'll be looking into that also. So you should always put your research in context of what has already been published. So yes. So what is a good research? The following are correct, except purpose clearly defined, research process detailed, research design thoroughly planned, findings presented ambiguously, which is not correct. The question is the following are correct except.
Findings presented.
Yes, so ambiguous basically means open to one or more interpretation, not having one obvious meanings. Now, while research can have, the answer is correct, while research can have, sometimes research give out more open-ended questions, as I said before also. Instead of giving out proper defined results, they actually lead to giving out more open-ended questions. But at the same time, your interpretation from the findings should be presented properly. That should not be ambiguous. If you have done an experiment, you are saying that this is what I've gotten, and this can be this also, this can be that also. That is very ambiguous. You can write that based on prior papers, based on prior work, and based on this work, blah blah blah, this thing is more this thing is supported by some previous work, or thing is in contradiction to some previous papers, and the reasoning can be this. Whatever you feel your opinion is, your finding, your interpretation should be presented in a proper manner. At the same time, then you can write, but there can be other interpretations of this thing also, and that might lead, you can write that in the future scope. More studies, maybe more work is needed in this regard to give a clear cut answer to this thing. So whatever data you have gotten, your finding and your interpretation to that should be stated very clearly. Otherwise, that's not a good research. You can say, I've done this experiment, this can be in this also, this can be in that also, this can be in that also. So what's the point of your experiment? So you have to present it in a very clear, concise, crisp manner, but at the same time, in the next paragraph or next section, when you're writing about the future scope, you can also see that these were some of the limitations of this study, and that's why the data is open to other interpretations as well, and for that we need more research, blah blah blah. So I'm not exactly saying in the terms of research papers. If you go through any research paper and read through these paragraphs, you'll be able to see how people communicate this thing very professionally. So yes, the findings should be presented properly. However, your data can have other meanings also. If your data is not showing a normal trend as it should show, there can be 1,000 reasons behind that. But you should be able to defend whatever is happening according to your own viewpoint. Then you say that this result is open to other interpretation as well. So yes, that's what I meant. Amongst these four options, the option D checks out. It's more relevant to the question. Okay, so greater confidence in the research is warranted if the researcher is experienced, has a good reputation in research, and is a person of integrity. It's also very self-explanatory. What do you think? Anybody else? Yes, correct. So it's if you have been in the field for a long time, you have worked on many projects, you have seen other people do projects, you have read many theses. So if you're working on a project, you can see that your supervisor is not only supervising you. He or she will have a lot of other students in the lab that they are supervising. You have only your project to think about, but the supervisor is thinking about 100 different projects at the same time. They are guiding the other students, they are writing grants for funding, very important. They're also doing thesis review from people for other lab, like for people from other labs. So there are when you are giving when you have written your thesis after 5 years of PhD, you have to give it to some committee members for the review process. Some committee members who are working in similar fields for the review process, and then those review process. After the review process is done, that's when you have this seminar or PhD defense, and that's when you give the presentation, you defend your thesis, and you get the doctorate salutation. But before that, your supervisor doing a lot of things. They're talking to you about your project, they're talking to 100 different people, they're writing grants, they're also reading thesis from some other lab, which might be a little related to the work conducted in your lab, but might be very different as well. So obviously, with experience, people are not only working on their own project. The experience is not only working on your own project experience. The experience is seeing 1,000 different people work on their projects. So obviously, when you're experienced and if you have a good reputation in research, it's guaranteed that you have done good work. You have been someone with integrity. If you are someone with integrity, if you have always been honest in research, which is very important. If you have always been honest in research, then obviously you'll have a greater confidence in your research. Very self-explanatory. Anybody? Next question. A complete disclosure of methods and procedures used in the research study is required. Such openness to scrutiny has a positive effect on the quality of research. However, competitive advantage often mitigates against methodology disclosure in business research. Not only business research, this session was basically from a on website, but even in scientific research, there's obviously competitive advantage all the time. So let me know if the question is clear, or I'll explain the question a little bit more. Is the question clear, or do you want me to explain it in again? So what the question is saying that when you're writing a research paper, when you're talking about your research study, you should explain the methods and procedures that you have used very clearly and very in a very detailed manner, in a very elaborate manner. Such openness, when you're showing such openness, when you're being such honest with your work, such openness scrutiny, when you're giving your entire methods and materials in such detailed elaboration, obviously there will be scrutiny. People will read more into it, and they'll be able, there are more chances of criticism. People will be scrutinizing your methods and materials in a very, very strict manner. But this, all of this has a very positive effect on the quality of research. When you are so open about your methods, people know that you have nothing to hide. You have worked very honestly. You are a woman of integrity, and you have worked very honestly. However, there is always a competitive advantage that often mitigates against methodology disclosure. What is the the question is saying that there is always a competitive advantage that often mitigates. Like, often this competitive advantage stops people from disclosing the method section. Is this statement true or false? What do you think?
It's true.
It's true. Yes, even in science, it's very true. When you're writing papers or stuff, you'll often hear people saying that why are you working? Why are you not working fast? Because some other lab from some other part of the world can publish this result before you. So this is very very true in any kind of scientific research as well, because there are thousands of, not thousands, there are like so many labs all over the country working on similar things, and if they publish the results before you, your entire work goes out of the window, because once they are published, you have to tweak your study, you'll have to add more data to it, you have to conduct more experiments. It basically requires a lot of work. So that's why people often stops people from talking about methodology. But then once your paper is published, then people, if even if they have a similar work, they have to give you a reference. If they have taken some ideas or some ideas or some knowledge from your paper, if they have taken some inspiration from your paper, they have to give you citation. Otherwise that will be considered as an act of plagiarism. So till the time your paper is published, there's a very strict timeline that you have to follow. You have to do things very fast, otherwise some other people can always do the work and get published. So that's very that's a very sad truth in science, in any research. Next question. Research is any organized inquiry carried out to provide information for solving problems. True. What do you think? Obviously it's true, because research is an organized inquiry. Why organized? Because you're not randomly making assumptions or randomly coming up with questions. You're going through a proper channel, you're going through literature review regarding a topic of interest, you're reading through papers, you're realizing the gap in the work, and then you're coming up with different questions to solve anything has been addressed before, that has not been addressed before. So obviously it's an organized inquiry that is carried out to provide information for solving problems. That's true. Conclusions must necessarily follow from the premises. Identify the type of arguments that follows the above condition. Anybody? I'm audible, right? I'm still in the meeting. Okay, last time actually I got out of the meeting and I didn't. Yeah. So it's deduction variable. So I think last time we did talk about inductive reasoning and deductive reasoning. Deductive reasoning is when you deduce something, you have a hypothesis and you follow that because you are deducing something. Induction is basically the opposite. You observe something and then you come up with a hypothesis and stuff. So basically these are the two different types of reasoning that we follow in science: inductive reasoning and deductive reasoning. Next question. One of the terms given below is defined as a bundle of meanings or characteristics.
Ma'am, can you please explain the previous question?
Deductive reasoning or deductive. Okay, I'll have.
Yes, yes.
Yes, one second. I have a slide, I think, somewhere here. Wait, one second. One second. Yes, so this one. So we have two types of this. I think Professor Ganesh might have explained in the lecture videos. You can listen to that. Obviously, his explanation must be much better than mine. But still, in scientific communication, there are two types of reasoning, which is inductive and deductive reasoning. In deductive reasoning, basically, you deduce something. You see, you have a theory. You move on to the hypothesis, and then you have some observation, and then you confirm. Like that's deductive reasoning, I feel, is the most common way of going through a scientific inquiry. You read through stuff, you are getting all the theoretical knowledge that you can get, then you are forming a hypothesis. Based on that, you conduct experiments, you observe something, you analyze data, you interpret the data, and then you confirm that. That is deductive reasoning, because you are deducing things. In the inductive reasoning, it is quite opposite, in that you observe something happening, then you find out the pattern. You observe something, you find out the pattern, then based on the pattern, you formulate a hypothesis, and then you try to relate that to the theory that is there. So these are the two different types of reasoning. Do go back to the lecture slides and see how Professor Ganesh explains this. I think he has a marvelous way of explaining this. So these are the two different types of reasoning that are there. So when you deduce something, that's mostly when it's called deductive reasoning, and the other one, the opposite type of reasoning that we follow in scientific research, is inductive reasoning. According to my opinion, I think deductive reasoning is much more common in case of scientific research. So
Can you
conclusion.
go back to the
Question.
question? I didn't
Yeah.
understand
Yeah.
the question.
Yes. So question was, one second. This is slide number. One second. If I have to come back, I'll remember. This is slide number. Okay. The question is. One second. Yes. The question was, conclusions must necessarily follow from the premises. Identify the type of premise. Means basically conclusions must necessarily follow from the observations. Whatever observation you have seen, that should lead to the conclusion of the study. So identify the type of argument that follows the above condition. Premises, you can just think in that way. Basically, conclusions must necessarily follow from the observation. So we have seen in the deductive reasoning, first you go to you have a theory, you have a hypothesis, you have observation, and then you move to conclusion. While in the inductive reasoning, we observe something, we find out the pattern, then we formulate the hypothesis, and then we move to theory. But in deductive reasoning, you first observe something, and that's what follows, and you observe something that is followed by the confirmation or conclusion, basically. So that's why we call it deductive reasoning. Am I clear? You can actually just
Yes,
go
yes.
back to
They have used the word variable, so
premises.
I got yeah, I
Correct,
got a
correct.
bit confused.
Yeah,
Thank you.
the question is a little bit confusing. Also, please do go back and see how sir has explained it.
Sure,
It will be
sure,
easier.
sure.
It will be easier. Yeah, I think just check out the videos and see in which video he has explained it. I think he has explained it in a very clear manner. This picture is also taken from his slide only. I was actually searching, but then I found that his slide actually sums up the entire thing in a very brief but still very clear way, so it's easier to explain. So just go back and see how he explains. He might have given a very good explanation. Okay, so yes, so the next question is, one of the terms given below is defined as a bundle of meanings or characteristics associated with certain events, objects, conditions, situations, and the like. So what do you think? This question is also a little bit confusing. So what they're trying to say is that one of the terms in the options below is related to a bundle of basically talks about characteristics associated with an event. And what do you think that word might be? Think about an event and think about the different characteristics or features associated with an event. So out of the four options, so which one? Concept. Okay, anybody else?
Um,
My opinion, it's variable.
Okay. So I think both work out. When I was writing, I think I thought concept was the better option, but now that I see, since we're talking about characteristics about an event, I think variable is also a very prominent answer in that case. When you're talking about a particular, definitely construct or definition doesn't come close to the question, close to the right answer. Concept is something, or concept is also something that you can explain with this, or variable. I think variable also makes quite sense, because it's, if you are talking about a particular event or condition, and you're talking about the different conditions, different parameters of that particular event, I think variable also makes sense. So yes, it might be concept or it might be variable also. Yeah, I think so. The next question is that this is an idea or image specifically invented for a given research or theory building purpose. What do you think? Idea or image specifically invented for a given research or theory? Idea, image, or anything? Anybody?
construct.
Okay.
Construct.
Yeah, construct, this is correct. So for a given research or a given hypothesis building, if you are using any idea, image, in any kind of research, I think that particular thing specific for that particular kind of research, it will be a construct. Yeah, amongst the other options, construct is the most relevant. Next question, the following are the synonyms for independent variable except, this is a little bit tricky, even I am, the following are the synonyms for the independent variable except.
Manipulated.
Okay, except like you have to choose the odd one out.
Yeah, consequence seems to be like something which is dependent on some other thing because it's a consequence.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. Even I was thinking like this only when I thought this. So consequence basically means result. So it's depending on something else. I think it's more of a dependent variable. The other thing, stimulus is something, it's an independent. You even in scientific research, you have a stimulus and you basically get results based on that stimulus. Manipulated, I mean, it's a manipulation. The correct word should be manipulation. You're manipulating something kind of like a stimulus only, a trigger, and then you are seeing the results. Or if your presumed cause, if something is changing in a particular condition, that is changing the results, then the presumed cause is the independent variable. But amongst these four options, I think consequence doesn't really relate much to the independent variable stuff. It's more of a dependent variable, because consequence means result. It depends on something that has already happened. So consequence, I think he's correct. Consequence is something that checks out from this, for this question. Correct. So the following are the synonyms for dependent variable except, presumed effect, measured outcome, response, predicted from. Which do you think is the odd one out? It will be
Presumed effect.
okay. You think it's the odd one out? I'll say I think it's predicted from, because in
Yeah.
case of dependent variable, response is the same, result, consequence. Whatever you're changing in the condition, particular condition, you get a response based on that. So it's a dependent variable. Measured outcome is also a dependent variable. Presumed, I think presumed, the word presumed might be a little confusing. If you say only effect, that's basically the same as outcome. Presumed might be a little confusing, even I was confused, but when I compared with that with predicted from, I think predicted from makes more sense. Presumed effect, at least it has the word effect. You are, something is happening and that is
No,
there's an effect of that, huh?
I do agree the answer predicted from yeah.
Yeah. It should have been more clear if only effect had been mentioned. Presumed might be a little confusing, but I think odd one out should be predicted from. So Nate, this is a very stupid. This is obviously. So yeah, every research proposal, regardless of length, should include two basic sections, and they are. What do you think? Anybody?
First option.
Anybody else who has any conflicting point of view? I have a conflicting opinion on this question, so I'll be discussing that. But anybody else, if you have any other point of view, I would like to hear that. Okay, I'll answer then. First option makes the most sense out of all these four: research question and research methodology, definitely. But I personally feel bibliography is also very important. At the end of the day, you're taking data information from something that has already been published, and you should cite it. Obviously, if you're giving out a grant for if you're writing a grant for a professional purpose, and if you're submitting that, or if you are giving out a paper, bibliography is indispensable. You have to have that. You cannot go ahead without that, because that will be counted as plagiarism. But suppose you are submitting an application for an internship, or suppose you're submitting an application for a project. Sometimes people leave out the bibliography part, but in my opinion, that's not the right thing to do. But then, at least for internship applications, I remember there used to be a proper word limit. So if you have to add the research reference part also, it would extend the word limit, definitely. So sometimes we used to eliminate the reference part. We did not add that. We used to delete that portion, and we used to only focus on the research question methodology part. Obviously, every research proposal should have research question and methodology, but if you are being for professional kind scientific communication, bibliography is also very important. Otherwise, what is the point if you're not giving credit to the authors whose work is already been published? There's basically no point. So that's it. So this is the last question for today. This is also very self-explanatory. A proposal is also known as a work plan, prospectus, outline, draft plan, whatever. It's basically, anybody? It's all of the above. Proposal is work plan. It's basically prospectus is prospectus is
All the above.
what you're trying to do. It's basically an outline of the work that you're planning to do, and it's basically a draft plan as well. You're drafting out whatever you have planned for. So this also means all of the above, definitely. So anybody else has any question from whatever we discussed today, or anybody else? I can repeat again, or you can always, if you have any questions that you're not able to remember or say right now, you can also mail me, or you can write in the discussion forum of the NPTEL course. We'll be there to answer you. There should not be any problem. So
Yeah, I do have one question.
yes.
uh there is a bit confusion, like this confusion is actually coming from the other course which I am attending, which is the research philosophy.
Okay.
So the question is, like, is it like a hard line that the method of research should either be deductive or inductive, or the combination is also
Combination of
possible?
both. Yeah, I think the combination is also possible. Speaking from personal experience, I'm speaking. I think it's not a hard rule that you always have to do any one. Mainly, as I said, according to my own experience, I think the deductive approach is more common in science, but I don't know, there might be other approaches also quite relevant. A combination is also fine, but that is something that I feel. I think you're right. You can also write in the proposal. You can, I think Professor Ganesh has some live sessions. If you can actually ask him this question, because he's the one who has actually chalked out the entire course. If he has a different opinion, maybe you can ask him also. Um, but what I have seen in scientific science, mostly it's a deductive. Mostly I have seen, but inductive might also be possible, and a combination is definitely always possible.
I mean, I'm pretty sure that inductive is possible, because that is how the theory is generated.
Yeah.
Because theory is always generated when you have the collection of observations.
Observation, and there's a pattern. Correct.
Yes, exactly.
Hmm.
My question was whether the combination is like possible, and if yes, like I would really like to know at least an example, a concrete example.
Okay.
That would be my question. I mean,
Okay, I do not have a proper answer for you right now, example wise. I'll look into it and let you know the next time. I'll definitely look into it. For the example thing, I'll have to search a little bit. Did the TA or the course instructor in the other course say anything regarding? You can maybe ask them also. It's always good to have different opinions.
yeah, actually, yeah,
Okay.
they do have one question in the assignment, which the
Okay.
correct answer happens to be this, but it
Copy.
is like the answer was again controversial in the TA session. So like
Okay, understood.
that confusion is not getting resolved anywhere.
Okay.
So I thought maybe if you
Yeah.
have the idea, like,
Yeah, I example wise, I don't have a proper answer for you right now, but I'll definitely look into it and let you know.
sure, thank
I
you.
think that's a really good question. It will actually allow me to go and search if there's an example, proper example. I'm pretty sure there will be proper examples of combination studies also. I'll look into it and let you know. Thank you for the question. That's
Yeah,
really
thank you.
good. Thank you. Anybody else? If there's no question, maybe we can stop the session. Thank you so much, guys, for
Thank you, Neha.
thank you such for an interactive session. We'll meet again next week, next Monday, same link, same time. Thank you. I'll stop the meeting today. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you,
Thank you so
Mayur.
much, ma'am. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you, Satish. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.